I chose to do my screencast over how frogs are affected by climate change. I do have a few scientific names that might give me some trouble, so you might have to bear with me. First, I'd like to talk about why I chose to do my screencast over frogs. First, I just really like frogs. To prove how much, here's a picture of a bookcase I had when I was in the dorms. Here's my frog picture frame, 3 frogs making funny faces, and 2 more frogs over here. The second reason is because of Jeremiah, the bullfrog I raised from a tadpole. Here's another picture of him when he's almost completely lost his tail. The last reason is because frogs are almost always overlooked. When people think about wanting to help endangered species, they think about cute and cuddly pandas. But I think frogs can be just as cute, and it's just as important to preserve our frogs as it is to preserve the furry and fuzzy animals of the world. So what are the main concerns when it comes to frogs today? The first is, although amphibians have survived the last 5 major mass extinctions, there recently has begun a mass extinction of amphibians. An example of that is about 17 years ago, the golden toad and the harlequin frog, which is an Atelopus species, both went extinct. Since then, there have been about 67% of 110 species of Atelopus have gone extinct. That's just frogs. 1/3 of all amphibians are considered threatened, and over 43% are experiencing population declines. What are the causes of these extinctions? The first and most obvious is habitat destruction, caused of course by humans. Second, you might not have heard of, is a disease called chytridiomycosis, which is also in a way can be also linked to human interactions in the environment. And the last is climate change, which relates to chytridiomycosis in a way, so I want to spend the rest of the screencast talking about the last 2 causes. Chytridiomycosis is caused by a fungus called Batrachochytrium dendrobatiditis. That's obviously a mouthful, so it's more commonly known as the chytrid fungus. It's a cutaneous fungal infection, which basically means it's found in the epidermis of host species. The most important abnormality it causes is a hardening of the epidermis. It doesn't seem like a very serious problem, but for frogs or all amphibians, it can be really detrimental because frogs in particular rely on their skin for absorption of nutrients and water. If the skin is hardened, they can no longer absorb those nutrients and they will die. It's thought that the chytrid fungus originated in Africa. That's starting to be debated now, but there's not enough research to discount that theory, so we'll go ahead and consider that as the accepted theory. And the vector for the chytridiomycosis is thought to have been the African clawed frogs. So, how did the disease spread? Assuming it was the African clawed frogs that spread the disease, the African frogs carrying the fungus were exported worldwide for research starting in the 1930s, and this continued well into the 90s. The fungus then passed to the native frog species, and then finally the newly infected frogs were exported worldwide for the pet trade. And unfortunately, the pet trade of frogs is still not regulated well. So, how does chytrid fungus relate to climate change? The actual link between the fungus and climate change is still debated, but there are some studies that have found what they believe is a link. One study that I found studied the sea surface and air temperatures, and they believe they found that large-scale warming was a key factor in the disappearance of frogs. They believe this was because the temperatures in the areas they studied were shifting towards growth optimums for the chytrid fungus. Basically, the temperatures at night were getting warmer and the temperatures during the day were getting cooler due to cloud cover caused by climate change. And this meant that the fungus no longer got too cold to survive at night or too hot to survive during the day. And this encouraged disease outbreaks. If what this study says is true, it's very important that we find a way to stop the climate change in these areas so that the chytrid fungus doesn't get even stronger than it already is. It's also important that we find a way to either prevent the fungus from infecting frogs in the first place, or a way to cure the disease worldwide, which doesn't seem likely at the moment. Now I'd like to show you a video. So that video is a few years old, but I still feel like it gets the point across fairly well. I hope you learned something from this screencast, and here are my references.